time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The confirmation arrived without ceremony, yet its meaning was impossible to soften. Behind palace walls, a final decision had been approved, written down, and communicated to the people who needed to know. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle would not resume royal duties, regain their former position, or return as working members of the monarchy. This was not another temporary disagreement. The institution had closed the door, and this time, no one was preparing to reopen it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. King Charles held the final document in his private office. Buckingham Palace, the sovereign's official headquarters, had formally confirmed that the Sussexes would never return as working royals, and no reconciliation would restore their roles. The king read the decisive paragraph twice, removed his glasses, and lowered the pages without speaking. He had tried to preserve a path between fatherhood and duty. Now it was gone. The decision protected the crown from uncertainty, but it forced the monarch to accept that loving his son could no longer mean reopening the institution to him. Prince William stood near the window while the wording received its final review. The future king felt relief. Years of private talks, accusations, absences, and failed compromises had trapped the monarchy between hope and disruption. Yet anger moved beneath that relief. He remembered attempts to create distance without cruelty, only to watch that distance become another source of conflict. A working royal, meaning a family member who officially represents the sovereign, could not operate outside palace control while claiming its authority. William knew the boundary had to be unmistakable. A senior courtier placed the approved statement inside a red dispatch folder, used to carry official royal papers. He closed it with both hands. That movement transformed years of argument into permanent policy. The statement did more than rule out official duties. It declared that future contact with Harry would remain personal and separate from royal restoration. Charles heard the distinction and looked down. William heard it and remained still. Neither man celebrated. Then the message left for California before the announcement. Meghan Markle read the restrained wording and understood the hidden force. The palace was not delaying their return or attaching conditions. The possibility itself had been removed. She looked toward Harry, and her expression made clear that the next shock would not come from London alone. But while the palace prepared the world for an institutional ending, the people at the center of the decision were confronting something far more painful: the collapse of a family that had once believed it could survive anything. Behind every official sentence stood four people carrying very different versions of the same history. Charles saw a son who had moved beyond his reach. William saw a brother who had broken the trust between them. Harry saw a family that had never understood the depth of his anger. Meghan saw an institution that had chosen its survival over her return. The announcement was shared publicly, but its deepest consequences belonged to them alone. Harry stood alone at the kitchen counter in California, staring at the palace communication on his phone. He had grown up inside the monarchy, surrounded by rules that shaped where he stood, what he said, and how the public understood him. A working royal meant someone who officially carried out duties on behalf of the sovereign, and that former role had once given him status, purpose, and a permanent place beside his family. Leaving Britain had brought freedom, but the message now demanded a painful price for that freedom. Returning would require him to accept limits he had already rejected. Remaining outside meant surrendering the hope of ever recovering the position he once believed would always be his. Harry reached the final paragraph, and his jaw tightened. The words did not insult him. They did something colder. They separated private family contact from public royal status, making clear that affection could never again become a pathway back into official life. He recognized William's thinking immediately. The future king had drawn a boundary between brotherhood and monarchy, and the younger prince knew that line had been written to survive every future argument. He placed the phone face down and did not answer. Meghan entered and stopped when she saw his expression. She had built a public identity outside palace control, one shaped by her own choices rather than royal permission, yet the closure still struck deeply because it removed the symbolic power of deciding whether she might someday return on her own terms. "Is it final?" she asked. Harry gave one quiet nod. She pulled out a chair but remained standing, caught between anger and vindication. The institution she believed had rejected her had now confirmed the separation. But confirmation did not feel like triumph. Charles had fought to keep one human truth inside the statement. The king insisted that no official language could erase Harry's identity as his son, even while the crown ended every expectation of restored duty. William had demanded equal clarity in the opposite direction. Personal contact could continue, but it could never again be used to reopen royal authority. Their compromise lived inside the restrained wording, carrying a father's sorrow and a brother's distrust in the same carefully measured sentences. Meghan looked toward Harry again, and neither needed to say what both understood. This decision had not begun with the statement. It had begun during one royal gathering, when a private request turned into a confrontation and convinced the palace that reopening the gates would only bring the old conflict back inside. To understand why the decision became permanent, the story must return to the moment when a carefully planned family gathering turned into the incident no one inside the palace was ever able to forget. The final break did not begin with the public statement. It began months earlier inside a private sitting room at Windsor, where a conversation intended to repair the family instead exposed how far apart everyone had become. There were no cameras, no public speeches, and no audience to impress. Only Charles, William, Harry, and a request that forced each man to decide what he was still willing to forgive. Charles entered the room carrying a fragile hope he had refused to abandon. Tentative messages had suggested Harry might attend a future family occasion if careful conditions could be agreed, and the king believed personal warmth might create a narrow path back toward trust. Windsor, one of the monarch's principal royal residences, offered privacy away from the formal machinery of Buckingham Palace. That privacy mattered because the discussion was meant to concern family first, not public status. Yet William arrived with a different fear. The prince believed another ceremonial compromise would restore royal legitimacy before the damage between them had been repaired. Harry listened until the polite opening remarks were finished. Then he placed several prepared pages on the table. The younger son asked for public recognition that he and Meghan remained central members of the family, along with a visible ceremonial role at the proposed gathering. A ceremonial role meant an official, publicly recognized position during a royal event, even without full working duties. To him, the request was not about power. It was proof that his wife and children had not been pushed beyond the family's boundaries. William heard something else. He heard an attempt to reclaim the crown's authority without accepting its discipline. Charles leaned forward and tried to separate two painful truths. He told Harry that he could be welcomed privately as a son, even if he could not return publicly as a representative of the monarchy. The king repeated that affection remained, but official restoration required trust that no longer existed. Harry's face hardened. What his father called separation felt to him like rejection disguised as love. He asked how a family welcome could be genuine if Meghan entered through a private door while others watched from positions of honor. Then the conditions became the trigger no one forgot. Harry stated that Meghan would not return to Britain unless the palace publicly acknowledged its past failures and guaranteed equal ceremonial treatment. William pushed his chair back. He looked directly at his brother and said no public position could be discussed, while private conversations continued becoming weapons outside palace walls. Harry gathered the pages before Charles could calm either man. Harry reached the doorway, but William's final words stopped the room cold. The monarchy could not repeatedly reopen a door being used to attack it. The younger prince left without answering, while the king remained between an empty chair and the son who refused to soften his judgment. The Windsor meeting ended without agreement, but the true emotional explosion came later, when the brothers faced each other again, and neither was willing to retreat behind palace courtesies. There are arguments that leave room for reconciliation, and there are confrontations that reveal reconciliation may no longer be possible. When William and Harry met privately after Windsor, they arrived without aides, advisors, or prepared statements. They stood not as heir and exile, but as brothers carrying years of resentment into one room. What followed did not create the divide. It stripped away the last illusion that the divide could easily be repaired. William had requested the meeting because he wanted his brother to hear the consequences directly, not through officials or carefully filtered messages. The heir, meaning the person next in line to inherit the throne, feared that another indirect exchange would be leaked, reshaped, and turned into a fresh public battle. Harry agreed for the opposite reason. He believed the prince had become the main barrier between his family and royal acceptance. Both entered certain that the other had twisted the past beyond recognition. William closed the door himself and remained standing. Harry placed his phone on a side table, making it clear that nothing would be recorded. Yet the gesture did not create trust. It exposed how little trust remained. The younger brother accused the family of demanding silence while refusing accountability for the treatment Meghan had endured. He said, every attempt to speak honestly had been treated as betrayal. The future king listened without interrupting, but his restraint soon broke. William answered that every private effort had been followed by another public disclosure. He spoke of Catherine, of their children, and of the pain caused when family conversations became material for interviews, documentaries, and published accounts. The prince insisted that they had been dragged into a conflict they never chose. Harry rejected that defense, arguing that silence had protected the institution while leaving him and Meghan exposed. Neither raised his voice at first. That made every sentence land harder. William finally stated the boundary without decoration. He would not support any arrangement allowing Harry and Meghan to move between commercial independence and royal authority whenever it benefited them. Royal authority meant the public influence and official standing attached to representing the crown. Harry heard the message beneath the explanation. His brother was not proposing a pause. He was preparing permanent exclusion. Harry stepped closer and asked whether William was speaking for himself or for the crown. The room fell silent. After a long pause, the heir replied that on this issue, there was no longer a meaningful difference. That answer changed everything. Their personal conflict had become succession policy, the long-term position intended to continue when the next monarch took the throne. William opened the door when the conversation ended. Harry walked past him without looking back, carrying anger that had hardened into certainty. Yet both brothers knew the final authority still belonged to Charles. The king now had to decide whether hope as a father could survive responsibility as a sovereign. The brothers had reached the boundary neither could cross, but only one signature could transform their private breakdown into the permanent position of the crown. Power inside a monarchy rarely announces itself through raised voices. Sometimes it appears in the movement of a pen across a single page. Charles had spent years protecting the possibility that time might soften anger and restore communication with his younger son. But the crown could not live indefinitely inside that possibility. When the final recommendation reached his desk, the king faced the choice every parent fears and every sovereign is expected to make. Charles remained seated after the advisors withdrew, their recommendation still open before him. The document argued that continued ambiguity was weakening the monarchy because every family contact created fresh speculation about returns, ceremonial roles, and renewed influence. A half-in arrangement meant living independently while still claiming selected royal duties and privileges, and the palace believed that compromise had already failed. William could demand firm boundaries, and senior officials could shape the wording, but only the monarch held the constitutional and household authority to approve the permanent position. Without his consent, the argument remained unresolved. Charles reached for a short handwritten note Harry had sent years earlier. The words belonged to a son speaking to his father, not to the Duke of Sussex addressing the crown. A duke is a high-ranking noble title, but here it also represented the public role, expectations, and controversy attached to the younger prince. The king placed the note beside the formal recommendation. One page carried affection. The other demanded separation. Together, they exposed the impossible choice he had delayed for too long. Camilla entered after the room had fallen silent and found him staring at both papers. The Queen Consort asked nothing at first. She understood that advice would sound like pressure, and pressure was the last thing he needed. Charles finally admitted that signing the decision felt like confessing a personal failure. He had hoped patience might rebuild what anger had destroyed. She placed her hand beside the document and waited, allowing the monarch to reach the decision as both father and sovereign. Charles picked up the pen but changed the original language before signing. He refused to describe Harry and Meghan as banished from the family. Instead, the final wording declared that their separation from official royal life was complete, permanent, and not open to future negotiation. The distinction mattered. His son would not be erased from his private heart, but the Sussexes would never again use family connection as a path back to institutional authority. Charles signed. He capped the pen and kept his hand resting on it for several seconds. No triumph followed. The signature protected the crown while deepening the distance from Harry, and the king understood both consequences at once. Camilla watched him close the folder, knowing that one decision had secured the monarchy's direction and wounded the man responsible for it. The king's signature ended the debate at the highest level, and within hours, the decision began moving through the royal household, with consequences no carefully written statement could conceal. Final decisions become real through consequences. A name disappears from a planning document. A private channel is closed. An invitation is no longer expected. As the palace machinery adjusted to the king's approval, the effects traveled far beyond Britain. In California, Harry and Meghan were not merely reading a statement, they were watching the remaining structures connecting them to official royal life being dismantled one careful instruction at a time. Royal staff moved quickly once the signature was recorded. Future ceremonial plans were rewritten, so no one could assume the Sussexes might appear as working royals, represent the sovereign, or hold a formal place at state events. A royal commemoration, meaning an official event honoring a person or historic moment, would now include Harry only as a private relative if an invitation was personally approved. That distinction mattered, because public placement creates authority. One seat, one procession, or one official mention could suggest that the separation was temporary. The palace intended to leave no such opening. Harry received confirmation that the next commemoration would contain no official role for him. He read the message once, walked away, and gripped the back of a chair. Then he returned and read it again. The decision cut deeper than the public statement, because ceremonies had shaped his life from childhood. They were proof that he belonged to something larger than himself. Now the same institution was continuing without him, and it no longer needed to explain the absence as temporary. Meghan watched his reaction with colder control. She told him the palace had finally said openly what she believed it had intended for years. Yet her certainty concealed another truth. Permanent closure removed expectations, but it also removed leverage. There could be no negotiation over a possible return because the possibility itself had disappeared. She had escaped royal control, but she had also lost the power to decide whether she would ever accept its terms again. Harry called Charles directly. The conversation lasted only minutes. The king repeated that their private bond as father and son had not been abolished, but he refused to reconsider the institutional decision. Institutional discussions meant official matters involving duties, titles, ceremonies, and the operation of the crown. Those subjects would now pass through formal channels rather than personal messages or family intermediaries. Affection could remain. Influence could not. Harry ended the call and stood silent until Meghan asked what had been said. He told her that his father had sounded exhausted, not angry. That unsettled him more than another argument would have. Anger could still be challenged. Exhaustion meant the palace had moved beyond resistance and into acceptance. Meghan looked directly at him and asked whether they were still waiting for royal permission to define their future. Harry did not answer immediately, but the question changed the room. For years, every choice had carried the shadow of return. Now they faced a private decision neither the palace nor the public expected. For the first time, the Sussexes were forced to confront a future in which no royal return remained available, and that certainty pushed Harry and Meghan toward a turning point of their own. The turning point did not occur before cameras or through another statement. It happened late at night, after the calls had ended and the official words had been read too many times. Harry and Meghan sat together without advisors, publicists, or palace representatives interpreting what came next. For years, the possibility of return had remained inside every argument. Now that possibility was gone, forcing them to decide whether the closed door would define their lives forever. Harry looked back over the years since their departure and saw how deeply the monarchy still shaped every decision. Anger had kept him connected to it. Defense had kept him answering it. Expectation had made every family conversation feel like the beginning of another negotiation. Institutional uncertainty meant the lack of a clear official position about their future roles, and the palace had now removed it completely. Yet family ties remained. The younger son could still speak to Charles as a father, but he could no longer treat those conversations as possible pathways back to status. Harry finally admitted what he had rarely said aloud. Part of him had continued to believe he could return under conditions that protected both his independence and his royal importance. He had imagined a version of the future where he could live beyond palace control while still holding a meaningful place inside the crown. Saying it now exposed the hope beneath years of public defiance. The possibility had not merely been political. It had been emotional proof that the family had not permanently moved on without him. Meghan reached across the table and told him that returning would never recreate the life they had left. The relationships had changed. Public expectations had hardened. The balance of power no longer belonged to the same people. She reminded him that royal significance, meaning the authority and recognition attached to official membership in the monarchy, could not be preserved without surrendering some of the freedom they had fought to gain. She asked him to stop measuring their future against a position that no longer existed. Harry opened an unfinished response, accusing the palace of cruelty. The words carried anger, blame, and one final demand for recognition. He read them once, then deleted them. Instead, he wrote a private message to Charles. He said he understood the official decision, even though he could not pretend it did not hurt. There was no warning attached, no condition, no threat of public retaliation. Charles read the message alone and exhaled slowly. The king did not mistake it for reconciliation, but he recognized something different in his son's words. For the first time in years, Harry had written without demanding an answer, correcting the past, or challenging the crown. Silence followed from California. The palace had expected a counterattack, yet none came. The world would soon decide whether that silence meant strategy or acceptance. As Harry and Meghan stepped back from immediate confrontation, the argument moved beyond the family, exploding across front pages, broadcasts, and the gates of the monarchy itself. By morning, the private pain of 4 people had become a global verdict. Broadcasters interrupted schedules, newspapers rebuilt their front pages, and crowds gathered at royal landmarks, searching for meaning in carefully chosen palace language. Some saw necessary strength. Others saw a family surrendering to bitterness. But across every interpretation, one fact remained unchanged. The uncertainty surrounding Harry and Meghan's royal future had ended in the most public way possible. William watched the first television bulletin beside Catherine as presenters described the announcement as the conclusion of the Sussex departure. Not another stage of negotiation. A hybrid role meant combining an independent private life with selected official royal duties, and commentators stressed that this possibility had now been removed completely. The prince remained silent until the presenter called it the permanent end of the Sussex royal era. He lowered the volume and admitted that hearing those words spoken publicly felt far harsher than approving the boundary behind closed doors. Catherine watched his expression change. She understood that certainty had protected their future, but it had also forced him to hear the loss of his brother described as historic progress. Palace staff refused to add a single emotional sentence. They repeated only the approved wording, knowing that further explanation could reopen the conflict the statement was designed to end. Buckingham Palace, the sovereign's official headquarters, and the public center of the monarchy, now spoke through restraint. Yet that silence made every phrase feel heavier. The less officials said, the more final the decision appeared. Harry watched the same story unfold in California. Archival footage showed him as a young prince, then as a soldier, a newlywed, and finally a man walking away from royal duty. He turned off the screen before the report ended. The younger son could not bear to see his life reduced to a clean before and after sequence, as though everything between belonging and departure could fit inside a short television package. Meghan sat beside him and recognized the wound immediately. She had expected public judgment, but she had not expected the past to be arranged like evidence. A newspaper captured the mood with the headline, "Palace closes the door." Beneath it appeared a photograph of Harry leaving a royal service while palace gates stood behind him. The image became the defining symbol of the day. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath umbrellas while a broadcaster read the confirmation live. One woman lowered a miniature Union flag and said, "It feels like the family has finally accepted what the country was still debating." Charles refused to watch the debate reach its loudest point. The king withdrew from the commentary and returned to the private office where he had signed the decision. Headlines could describe victory, defeat, exile, or survival. He knew the truth was quieter and far more painful. The world had chosen its images, arguments, and loyalties, but the final meaning of the decision could only be found in what remained after the attention moved on. When the broadcasts ended and the front pages were replaced, the palace remained standing exactly where it had always stood. Yet the family inside it had been permanently altered. Harry and Meghan were free from the expectation of royal return, but that freedom carried the pain of final exclusion. Charles had protected the crown, but he could not protect himself from grief. William had secured the future, knowing it had cost him the brotherhood of the past. Charles returned to the signed document after the public noise had faded. The permanent institutional reality was now clear. Harry and Meghan remained part of his family through blood and marriage, but their work, authority, and public identities were fully separate from the functioning monarchy. Institutional reality meant the official structure governing royal duties, influence, and representation, not the private emotions connecting relatives. The king placed the papers inside the drawer reserved for completed state matters. His hand paused before closing it. Official closure could end debate, but it could not erase a father's love, disappointment, or memory of the son he once believed would always stand beside him. William accepted the decision without celebration. The prince understood why the boundary mattered. Future reigns, appointments, ceremonies, and public expectations could now proceed without repeated speculation that the Sussexes might return to official positions. That clarity protected the crown from constant negotiation and prevented private family contact from becoming a route back to royal power. Yet stability did not bring peace. The future king had secured the institution he would inherit, but he had done so by accepting that his relationship with Harry might never recover its old shape. Harry and Meghan chose silence. They issued no public counterattack, offered no recorded interview, and released no statement challenging the palace. Their restraint became its own acknowledgement. The royal chapter of their working lives was finished, and whatever came next would have to stand without palace recognition. The younger prince could no longer define success through return. His wife could no longer measure independence against the institution she had left. Together, they faced a future that was fully theirs, but also permanently separated from the authority they once carried. The monarchy emerged more controlled and less vulnerable to uncertainty. Yet it also appeared changed by the human cost of enforcing its limits. The crown survived because it chose continuity over emotional compromise. Charles carried grief. William carried responsibility. Harry carried exclusion. Meghan carried the final proof that the palace had moved forward without them. No winner stood at the end of this story. Two futures had simply become irreversible. One belonging to the crown and the responsibilities William would inherit. the other belonging to Harry and Meghan beyond its gates. The door closed because everyone finally accepted that the past could not be rebuilt, and with that acceptance, the argument ended. The crown moved forward, Harry and Meghan remained outside its official future, and a family learned that some doors close not with hatred, but with the painful certainty that opening them again would only deepen the wound. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.